I don't think any of us are happy with how we make and sell video games. So if no one's happy, then we should try different stuff. And I feel like KSA is one of those rare projects that could maybe try a different path.
Dean Hall is perhaps best known as the creator of DayZ and the CEO of RocketWerkz, the studio behind Stationeers and Icarus. He's now working on Kitten Space Agency, a space sim that is an unofficial second attempt at making a Kerbal Space Program sequel following KSP2's dramatic failure in 2024. We caught up with Hall recently and enjoyed a wide-ranging discussion on Kitten Space Agency's development, his gripes with how games are priced and published, the lessons learned from Icarus's troubled launch, and much more.
We could have just said, well, we're not changing it, but we had to change it. And it was really hard and it was really expensive and difficult, but it was obvious. It was very obvious when we launched.
There's timestamps in the description if you want to skip to something specific, but otherwise we hope you enjoy this candid conversation with Hall as much as we did. What inspires you about space exploration?
It's funny because I think when you're a kid, you don't think about a lot of stuff that's possible. So I grew up with Chris Butcher as a tech director at Bungie, and in a small town. So there's two people in a small town in New Zealand. Like most people don't even know where New Zealand is. We're left off of maps half the time. And so, I didn't think you could be a game developer, and I certainly didn't think you could be an astronaut or something. So, I was just always fascinated with space. I really loved Carl Sagan's Cosmos, like both the audiobook as well as the series. I just think that awokened an interest in programming and stuff like that, which then led to me modding and making games. Modding felt like something that someone could do from New Zealand. It's different. It's a different world now, but when I was young, a lot of these things, at least to me, didn't seem possible.
Dean pitched to develop Kerbal Space Program 2, but missed out, instead going on to produce survival game Icarus, which had its own troubled release. We asked what Dean and his colleagues had learned from working on Icarus.
So there was actually a point, a wee way through Icarus's development, where we kind of got the Stationeers and Icarus teams together, and actually they kind of started talking a lot just about how we communicated. We started to not standardize, but look for what was working on either side in terms of how we do our weekly blog posts, how we'd mix features together. We looked around at companies like Paradox and at how they would do updates and tie them with, a free big update and tie them with like a more cosmetics themed DLC. I think there was a lot about community engagement we learned, particularly because, Icarus is a much bigger community than, say, Stationeers, and it's always a lot more challenging the bigger your game is. Like, look at Helldivers, rabid, because I played a lot of Helldivers too, like a rabid community, literally kind of designed around this meta game that comes with enormous challenges in terms of talking directly to the customer. So I think there was a lot of benefits there. Icarus was really expensive to make, so we were under a lot of pressure. So we had to compromise quite a lot with decisions we wanted to make, and you saw that with how the product came out. I'd said off camera there was a long time when we didn't actually even have animals in Icarus, and I think you can see that still in the game today. When you don't have something in the game and it's causing you a problem with development for a while, that leaves almost like a scar. The longer you don't have something in your game, when you're in that find the fun phase, you really can't ever almost recover for that stuff.
Are you motivated by a sense of duty to pick up the Kerbal torch?
Duty would be the nice way to put it. I'd probably say it's a little bit of a mix of obsession with a seasoning of spite. We're literally doing this in the room that I pitched KSP2. We were one of the last three. But I think there's definitely a bit of obsession there. I think it's just such an interesting opportunity, and I think we really wanted to try and do it properly. It's funny because I think we probably wouldn't have been able to do it justice at all when we pitched it. Certainly not technically. When we brought in a lot of people into the studio a few years ago before we to do Icarus from the Path of Exile team, just really talented engineers, and just learned a lot technically through stuff.
How did development on Kitten Space Agency begin?
So we had been working on this framework we called Brutal secretly in the studio. We didn't even tell other people at the studio because it was such a it was such a dumb thing to do. It's like you're a game developer and you're like, we're making our own engine. And people are like, cool, we'll see you in 4 years when you've gone out of business. It's designed to make games that are difficult to make. But we didn't really have a target for it. We didn't really have something directly to work on. The first thing I'd actually started making with it was called Orbit. And it was even before we had a renderer. At the end of that, I was like, okay, well, KSP2's there. There's going to be no way we're really going to compete with it. And it was when the warn notice went out, that was when I was like, maybe we could do this. And we did basically a pre-production. I've always maintained this is a technical problem. This is a project that requires technical solutions. Yeah, so I think we were just really lucky on that front, that we had been working on a tool that we could maybe use to make this kind of game, and it kind of just got thrown in our hands.
How far through development on KSA are you?
We're on that train of moving between focusing on the really core architectural stuff. So we kind of really focused on picking just the biggest technical problems. What was the hardest stuff to do? We've solved, or appear to have solved, the biggest technological problems that we thought existed and that we needed to overcome. And then we try and start the transition to finding the fun. And so I'd say we're probably mid between those two. We actually want to get it into the public hand a little bit, but at this level, that's more because we want to get modders to really just pull apart the data structure. Obviously, actually, I still make a lot of mods, and there's a lot of really good games, and they have to change their data structure a lot. Rimworld had to do it. Zomboid had to do it and stuff like that. We're trying to get as much of that out of the way before your, say, average gamer gets their hand on it. So we'll probably do that earlier rather than later.
You've said you intend to release KSA for free. Can you tell us more?
I don't think any of us are happy with how we make and sell video games. I don't think a lot of customers are happy. So if no one's happy, then we should try different stuff. And I feel like KSA is one of those rare projects that could maybe try a different path. We're talking a lot with the community to see maybe we could actually make the game completely free forever, but power it off contributions. I like to use the word contributions rather than donations, because I think, donations are something you do for like a not-for-profit or whatever. We're sort of trying to see that we can try something different with a lot of talk with the community and stuff like that. In KSP, there was the educational version, and I think one of the things that really attracts me to the project is that, rather than necessarily being a response to KSP2, which I think that's an important outcome element from it, I actually think a bigger part of it is probably, if we can make it free, it's a lot easier to get it in schools. We're really good at teaching people stuff, but I think video games has a role to play in inspiring people. I didn't get the point of history at high school until I played Crusader Kings. And then my parents visited me in Prague and were like, I'm telling them about the Holy Roman Empire and stuff, and my mum's like, where did you learn this? And I was like, I was playing, Crusader Kings. So I think video games can be really good at inspiring, but you need to play it and then take it home. So that's been a pretty big part of it. And then I think a nice bonus is that we need to restore a lot of faith. It was kind of like with Icarus. We had a rocky launch, and I remember I talked with the team. I was like, okay, we need to do weekly updates. And we were like, that's impossible. But it's like, we're going to have to do that. We might have to do it for years before we earn the trust back. That's the hope anyway. So we're going to try it out and talk with the community a lot about how it goes.
Why kittens?
It's a good question, and it's one that comes up a lot. I think the YouTube comments on anyone doing videos about a project, it always comes back to the kittens. I think that the best way I can describe it is, if the worst problem people have with the game is that we've got kittens, I'll be very, very relieved if that's the worst problem we have. It was really the idea that we came up with that was least disliked among the team. So, a natural choice would have been Kiwis. My New Zealand accent is full on strong now after having been back in New Zealand for so long. But they were going to be quite difficult to animate. And we've always struggled a bit sometimes because we get a lot of competition with film in New Zealand. So trying to get enough animators and artists and stuff in the room to really deliver stuff was really hard. That was very hard for Icarus. So I think we were just very sensitive that we needed to pick something that was going to be easy to make, that was adorable, because I really think that it's really important that you really care about these creatures. You know, human spaceflight and human aviation is incredibly, like, so much as let's keep these people alive. I thought that was something really important to get in the game as well. I know it was cool that, like, with the Kerbals, you just kind of throw them up, but I think for me, I think it's really important to tell that story. It's not just a few people in the in the command module. It's also a whole team of, like, scientists and stuff like that. So when we were prototyping the Kittens, we've been making, what do they look like as engineers? What do they look like as scientists? Maybe we'll chuck a couple of lawyers in there, I don't know.
What are your plans for multiplayer in KSA?
So I think what we've settled on is more of a co-competitive or cooperative style, which is essentially all live in the same time warp. So it's very Paradox game style, or I think you'd said you've been playing some RimWorld multiplayer, the mod, that kind of thing. You're all going to be in the same environment, but you can work together and do stuff. And look, I'm sure for a lot of people, they're like, oh, but I wish I could have, like, competing space programs at different warp levels and we just come together. But I just think it just introduced too much technical risk. I think we're really good at multiplayer. It's something we're certainly very passionate about. I know we can deliver on a lot of stuff like that. We use RACnet as a base, which is a very efficient way of multiplayer synchronization, which we demonstrated with Stationeers. Our multiplayer was pretty bad and our bases went big. Then we took the game basically offline for 8 months, refactored and wrote what then became RocketNet, which is what we use for multiplayer. So we've been able to kind of battle test what we're going to do with multiplayer with Stationeers.
Were you surprised by the reaction of the Space Sim community when KSA was announced?
Completely blown away. So we had, like, since we announced, we don't even have a logo on our Discord, and there's like 25,000 people on there, and our recruiting just went haywire. Like, we recruited Stefan, who did 12 years as the senior flight systems engineer at SpaceX. Many of those community members are, like, literally rocket scientists, professors and stuff like that. So it just did really well with recruiting. We brought on board BlackRack, who's incredibly well-known modder in the community. I actually think world expert in terms of atmospheric scattering and clouds. So we started out, and he was like, what do you want me to do? And we're like, what do you want to do? And he was like, oh, well, I'd been reading this paper on how Unreal had done atmospheric scattering, but they were in this other paper that's an evolution. I'd love to try that. And we're like, cool, let's do better atmospheric scattering than Unreal. Like, let's try that. And so, we managed to get him. So yeah, look, I think that, and I know I'm talking about the community and the development team enmeshed, but I think that's been what's really happened. They organize amongst themselves. They help us tell the complexities of stuff. And, there's been some pretty spicy discussions among the team members and the community. We're going to do a proper town hall soon to talk through stuff. So I just think blown away, just really blown away with, and they're maintaining the right course, which is cautiously optimistic.
Throughout development on KSA, you've been extremely transparent with your community. Does this have its drawbacks?
I think there is, but I just think there's no other way. I also think if you get it right, it's an incredibly rewarding way to develop. The most fun time for me in my whole career or whatever was developing the DayZ mod. I removed pistols one day, like, from starting, and there was downfall memes. That was all part of it, and I think that I definitely missed that. And I think we saw with what's happening to the market, we really had to get closer to the community. Icarus the studio would not even exist. We'd be out of business if, when we had a rocky launch, that we didn't heavily lean into the Discord. There were a bunch of things that we did in Icarus, and the community said, we don't like it. And so we could have just said, well, we're not changing it, but we had to change it. And it was really hard and it was really expensive and difficult, but it was obvious. It was very obvious when we launched, even in the beta weekends, we were like, need to change it. So we wanted to move closer to that community engagement. When your customers are literally rocket scientists, and the amount of times I've met people from NASA and that now who are like, oh, I was inspired to take my job playing Kerbal Space Program. So I think whatever double-edged sword there is to it, it's just the benefits of it so outweigh the risks. And I think I was lucky because having gone through it with DayZ, because you do make mistakes with it and you do have to watch some things you say and things like that. So I think, I'm older now, so that's good, and I've learned a few things, and I think that's what, I don't think there's another way. I think that the studio literally wouldn't exist. Icarus would have imploded if we didn't do that. And I think we need to do that harder. We need to do that stronger.
Thanks, Dean, for your time. We had a blast chatting with you. No pun intended. For more extended chats with developers like this, subscribe to PC Gamer.